Hello, church. Let's continue to make much of Jesus together. We're going to continue through our study of the life of Christ and pick up where we left off last week with continuing discussing the ministry that Jesus did while in the region of Galilee. Last time we talked, we briefly discussed the content and the purpose of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And then we discussed Jesus's favorite way of teaching. We looked at some parables together, and we read the parable of the unforgiving servant and the parable of the wedding banquet. And then I also gave you a list of parables where you can find them on your own and just read more parables about Jesus' teaching, because they're very awesome. And so let's pick up today with some new material, and remember that Jesus is now in the region of Galilee. He's performing many miracles and doing much teaching. He has traveled all over the region, and now we are going to see that he travels to a place called Gadara. And I was going to try to show you where that was, but I don't think I am able to do that here as I go live. So you can always pull up your own map on YouTube or online somewhere and just look at the area of Galilee and see where Gadara is, just to give yourself a better idea. But this is a Gentile region, which is indicated by the large herds of pigs, which pigs were considered unclean by Jewish people. So being that they were pigs herders and there was a lot of pigs there, that indicates to us that this was a Gentile region. So I want to read you a miracle that Jesus is about to perform and see the response to it. So I'm going to be reading from Mark chapter 5, and I will be reading verses 1 through 20. Which says, "So they arrived at the other side of the lake in the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus climbed out of the boat, a man possessed by an evil spirit came out from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the burial caves and could no longer be restrained, even with a chain. Whenever he was put into chains and shackles, as he often was, he snapped the chains from his wrist and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Day and night he wandered among the burial caves and in the hills, howling and cutting himself with sharp stones. When Jesus was still some distance away, the man saw him, ran to meet him, and bowed low before him. With a shriek he screamed, 'Why are you interfering with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In the name of God, I beg you, don't torture me.' For Jesus had already said to the spirit, 'Come out of the man, you evil spirit.' Then Jesus demanded, 'What is your name?' And he replied, 'My name is Legion, because there are many of us inside this man.' Then the evil spirits begged him again and again not to send them to some distant place. There happened to be a large herd of pigs feeding on the hillside nearby. 'Send us into those pigs,' the spirit begged. 'Let us enter them.' So Jesus gave them permission. The evil spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the entire herd of about 2,000 pigs plunged down the steep hill into the lake and drowned in the water. The herdsmen fled to the nearby town and the surrounding countryside, spreading the news as they ran. People rushed out to see what had happened. A crowd soon gathered around Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons, who was sitting there fully clothed, perfectly sane, and they were all afraid. Then those who had seen what happened told the others about the demon-possessed man and the pigs, and the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and leave them alone. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him, but Jesus said, 'No, go home to your family and tell them everything the Lord has done for you and how merciful he has been." So the man started off to visit the 10 towns of that region and began to proclaim the great things Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed at what he told them. So we read the miracle of Jesus casting the demon out of the man and into the pigs. And let's just look briefly at some things that we can learn from this miracle. And one very clear-cut thing that we see is Jesus' omnipotence, his power. In verse 12, um, it says, "Send us into those pigs," the Spirit begged, "let us enter them." And Jesus gave them permission, and they were then cast out. So we see that Jesus has authority over evil spirits. We even see that these spirits seem to respect Jesus' authority. They asked for permission for where he was going to send them. And so this is significant to see and be reminded of Christ's power. Now, in verse 17, it struck me. It says the crowd began pleading with Jesus to go away and leave them alone. You know, if you read this story and you see the miraculous thing that Jesus did and how he helped this man, and many of them witnessed this and then told others, and why in the world would they want Jesus to go away? Well, it comes back to human nature. People's priorities often cause them to miss what matters most. You know, you will find in life that very often people will know what is good and know what is right, and they will still choose what is not good and not right because it suits their interest best. How else, you know, when we were in Williamsburg, the discussion about slavery is ongoing there. And we learned that many of the leaders and people that were slave owners knew, they would openly say that slavery, that it was wrong. They knew it was wrong. But I forget who it was, but one said, "We know it is wrong, but it would be really hard to do life without them. And so we keep our slaves." And so this is an example here of this. We see that Jesus is showing power, he's doing wonderful things, but these people were actually upset for a couple reasons. One is that one of the main financial um, means they had was through herding pigs. And the loss of these pigs, the 2,000 of them went and drowned and were lost, was a financial blow to many of them. Another thing, and it's another thing we see in humans, is they simply like things the way they were. This blew their mind. They couldn't comprehend Jesus' power. It made them uncomfortable. And this happens so often in churches when God does things that maybe make people uncomfortable, which is why, you know, I've always heard that my job as pastor is to comfort the disturbed, but also to disturb the comfortable. So in other words, I'm to help people that are hurting and help bring them comfort, but also to disturb people that are comfortable. And we see that's exactly what Jesus did. Now, in verse 18, we see as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been healed had a completely different reaction than the people from Gadara. says, as Jesus was getting in the boat, the man who had been demon possessed begged to go with him. He wanted to be with Jesus. He longed to be in his presence. He knew now more about this man and he wanted to be with him. And that's something that we can learn also. If we understand who Jesus is, we want to be in his presence. We want to be pursuing him. We want to be learning about him. We want to be studying his life and longing to be like him. So that's the miracle of the casting out of the demons. Remember that the Galilean ministry is full of miracles. And let's continue on in Matthew 5 and read the next thing that Jesus does. Jesus got into the boat again in verse 21 and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. "My little daughter is dying," he said. "Please come and lay your hands on her so she can live." Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. I'm going to skip down to continue this in verse 35. While he was still speaking to her, that is the little girl, he has now arrived. Messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. They told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. He went inside and asked, "Why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. She's only asleep." The crowd laughed at him, but he made them all leave, and he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, "Talitha koim," which means, "Little girl, get up." And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. They were overwhelmed and totally amazed. Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened. And then he told them to give her something to eat. Now, you can figure out what you learned from that miracle. Sometimes I encourage you to think it through and see the lessons there and what the Word of God would speak to you through reading about the power of Jesus Christ and what he did there. But you notice who came and asked for this healing. This was actually a synagogue ruler, which that means for a synagogue ruler to come to Jesus meant that he didn't care what people thought anymore. He forgot everything, and he knew what this man Jesus had been doing. And he came to him and said, "Help, I know you can do this," which is something very, very much to take note of. Now, what did the people do when Jesus said she was asleep? They laughed because they had not seen the power of Christ. This was an impossible thing. They knew she was dead. And we need to be constantly reminded that what seems impossible to us is all things are possible with God. And we see that demonstrated here. Another thing that I noticed is who Jesus took with him. If we haven't seen this already, we will see it more in the future. He took 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, and It may have had to do a bit with the quality of their faith, but these three kind of become the inner three of the 12, and we will see this again more later, as I mentioned. So, as we go through these miracles, I think we're studying the life of Christ. We're seeing what he did. We're following through his life. We're being encouraged and reminded of who it is that we love and serve. We make much of Christ, but we also want to look at these and say, what does this say to me in my life right now? How can I take what I read and either utilize it to encourage me or to act on Christ's heart or something? Now, let's move on. In chronologically and what Jesus does next, and this will take us to Luke chapter 9, and I'm going to read here verses 1 through 6. One day, Jesus called together his 12 disciples and gave them power and authority to cast out all demons and to heal all diseases. Then he sent them out to tell everyone about the kingdom of God, to heal the sick. Take nothing for your journey, he instructed them. Don't take a walking stick, a traveler's bag, food, money, or even a change of clothes. Wherever you go, stay in the same house until you leave town. And if a town refuses to welcome you, shake its dust from your feet as you leave to show that you have abandoned those people to their fate. So they began their circuit of the villages, preaching the good news and healing the sick. Now you need to continue to remember this area of Galilee. Jesus is pouring out the beginning of his ministry in this area, and he's actually traveling around the area. Familiarize yourself on the map. He's going around. He is now really going on his third circuit through the area. The first time he went through with 4 of his disciples. The second time he had gathered them all, and he travels through the area with all 12. And this time, his third time through, he now says to the 12 who have been with him and have witnessed these miracles, have witnessed so many things, he says to them, it's your turn now. And he sends them out. He sends them out and empowers them and tells them to go and do what you've seen me doing. Now, why do you suppose he did this? Why do you suppose he sent them out? Well, it could be sort of a trial run, because we know that we have recently looked at the book of Acts chapter 1, and we know that Jesus left, that he ascended to heaven in Acts chapter 1. And right before he ascended, he told his disciples, you have a job to do. He says, go into Judea and Jerusalem and Samaria and the ends of the earth and do what I've been doing. So Jesus knows this time is coming, because this is before that happened. We're back now in the Gospels. Jesus knew that he would be leaving, and the task of preaching the gospel would be left to them one day. And so he's been training them this whole time, that he's gathered them to train them, to equip them for the time that he would depart. And now it's like he's saying, okay, guys, now's your turn. This is what I've been training you for. And I've learned over the years that this is how good leaders and actually good pastors also handle things. To follow the model that Jesus gave us. And that's what I long to do as your pastor. The first thing that Jesus did is he did it, and he took them with him, and they learned from him, and they watched. He did not send them out or ask them to do anything that he wasn't willing to do and that he hadn't done. The second thing is Jesus takes them and begins to do ministry together. Okay? We see now that he empowers them, right? And he's been bringing them along to go and do things with him. And then finally, we know that Jesus is going to ascend, right? And he's going to leave the work up to them while he goes actually and does something else. What that something else now is he is seated at the right hand of the Father, interceding on our behalf and reigning as king. But to put it in our application in our lives, the model would then be, I teach, you learn, we do some ministry together, and then ultimately you are sent out to do what you have learned and seen, and I go and do something else. And I've always valued this model of ministry that Jesus has given, and I long to see it happen, which is why I'm doing this teaching here online now instead of in person, so that you can be out. You can be out doing the work of Christ, doing his work. And so I encourage you, do not just listen to the video during the week, but go and do the work of Jesus. Now, let's see. Let's just finish with this. How do you think they're going to do? Jesus is about to send them out, and he's telling them not to even take anything. How do you think they're going to do? Well, let's read how they did. Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 30. The apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour and told them all they had done and taught. Then Jesus said, let's go off. Excuse me. I think I might be reading getting ahead of myself here. Let me take a look. Well, church, why don't I end there? My notes got a little bit out of order, and we've been meeting long enough. And we'll pick up there. We'll pick up to be continued. What do you think is going to happen when Jesus sends out the disciples? We'll pick up there next time. So I encourage you to continue to pursue Jesus, continue to live for Jesus, continue to go out and do the work of the Lord. And I love you. And if the Lord wills, we will meet on Sunday. And look forward to seeing you guys then.